My name is Joshua Heston. I'm editor-in-chief of State of the Ozarks. And this interview and these interview questions were developed in consortium among Liberty Lectures, Branson U, and the public. And I'm excited to be here filming. We're at the Hughes Brothers studio. So, of course, first off, I'd like to welcome our mayoral candidate, Karen Best, to this studio. And Karen, you were born in Blytheville, Arkansas, and grew up in East Chicago, Indiana, and Springfield, Missouri. You earned a bachelor's degree from Evangel University, which of course is in Springfield, and then a master's degree from Oklahoma State University, an education specialist degree from St. Louis University, and a doctorate ADD also from St. Louis University. You've worked as an educator for 20 years and served as an elementary principal in low-income communities. I think a lot of people have gotten to know you as a realtor for the last 15 years, and you have served as CEO of the best team at Keller Williams Tri-Lakes for the past 10 years. What some people might not know is you also worked at MGM United Artists in Los Angeles in special events and international publicity, and of course you held various jobs in retail, hospitality, and food service while working your way through college. You were elected as mayor of Branson in 2015, and you were re-elected in 2017. While in office, your focus was public safety, infrastructure, and economic development. During your service as mayor, you lobbied at a state committee hearing on Capitol Hill for after-school funding for students at Branson schools, and you spoke at the White House to seek assistance with infrastructure, workforce development, and the opioid epidemic crisis. You were elected to serve on the National League of Cities Board of Directors, and with Mayor Sly James of Kansas City, you started the Missouri Mayors United for Progress, in which you served as vice president. And since leaving office, you were appointed by Governor Mike Parson to serve as chairperson of the 2020 Missouri Complete Count Committee, which of course is the census.
That is the census, yes.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for letting me be here. This is awesome.
Absolutely.
Excited.
We're excited. I love this because we get to visit. And so just coming out of the gate, how do you see Branson in 5 years?
Ooh, 5 years. That would be 2026. My vision for Branson in 5 years is for us to be thriving, to be a 12-month economy instead of what's been an 8, maybe 9-month economy. I think it's very important moving forward that we diversify and really make it to where we can stay open 12 months. Of course, Mother Nature, as you've seen the last couple weeks, doesn't always, make sure that we can do that, but for the most part, we're no different than Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and they stay open 12 months. So there's no reason that Branson can't stay open 12 months. So when I was mayor, that was one of my big focuses, was trying to bring businesses to town that could have us stay open 12 months. So with the aquarium, Wonderworks, Fritz's, those type of attractions, it's made us a 12-month open economy. And so, my hope is that the theaters will jump on board with that too, because, I love our shows and I want them to be open 12 months as well. I think that, helps all the families that are involved with that and all the locals. So, moving forward 2026, I want us to see us up, thriving, big names coming to town, and 12-month economy. That's really my focus.
So more specifically, why did you decide to become involved with politics?
It's a really good question. I felt back before 2015 that Branson was kind of feeling stagnant to me, and kept trying to encourage people to run for mayor that I thought had a similar vision as me. Like I said, wanting to keep that 12-month economy, and I kept asking people, and they were like, great, I'm glad you think about that for me, but no, you should run. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's not me. I am not a politician. That's the first thing I'll tell you. I am not a politician. And it's a real learning curve when you go in and you have to learn to be somewhat political to get things done, because a lot of times you want to go in and it's going to be all great and we can get this done, and you promise that I'm going to do this, this, and this. But what you have is you have 6 people that actually vote and make the decisions what direction it's going. So you really don't have that voice when it comes to voting for what you want. And so I remember very vividly, I talked to Lane Morrill, who just passed away. He's a great leader in this community, and kind of asked him, what his thoughts were, and he really encouraged me to consider it. I talked with a couple of other leaders in the community, and they encouraged me to do it. And finally somebody stepped up and said, if you'll run, we'll raise all the funds you need to run, and you just focus on getting out what your message was. And I was like, okay, that's a whole different scenario. So I really took it to heart, and I prayed about it, and really felt that that was the direction that I was leading to. And so every election, people are always like, I'm praying for you to win, I'm praying for you to win. And I'm like, oh, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Pray for what's supposed to be, because if that's where I'm supposed to be and that's the role that I'm supposed to have, that's where I want to be. So that was kind of how I got into the position, was trying to get somebody else to do it, and finally people saying, you're that person, will you do this? And I had been on the Planning and Zoning Commission and watched how things had been done, and felt that this is probably something that I could make a difference. And that's what I wanted to do, was make a positive difference and get us moving in a positive direction, to where, like I said, we can stay open and we can have jobs, and it's a better life for people. Everybody wants the best life they can have, and that's what I want for everybody in our community, is to just be the best version of yourself and have the best life you can.
So coming to this race, here in 2021, what led you to run for mayor again?
The same exact thing that led me in 2015 was people reaching out and saying, we really miss you. We really think that the vision that you had for Branson was what we wanted to have. And it was a very close race in 2019. I have to go back and think, what year was that? 2019 was a very close race. If 29 people had changed their vote from Mayor Akers to myself, it would have been a different outcome. So it wasn't like a mandate of, we don't like you, go away. We don't support what your goals are and your objectives are for the city. And so once again, enough people came and said, will you run, will you run, will you run? And I took it to heart once again, and did the same thing I did in 2015, because after leaving office, sometimes life gets really comfortable. My business is doing great, I've got a great team, they're wonderful. It's not, you definitely don't run for mayor for the money, because there's not much money in doing that. So your business does take somewhat of a hit when you step out of that role. And so it's a sacrifice to do that, and it's a sacrifice that I'm very willing to do and that I want to do, because I think in the long run it makes a better community, and that's what it's all about.
So as a policymaker, what is your number one priority for Branson residents?
Number one is public safety. I have 3 things that are important to me, as we've you said in the beginning. It's always been public safety, infrastructure, and economic development. It's PIE, P-I-E. And so everybody loves pie, different kinds of pie. And, those are the things that I think they all go, hand in hand together. You can't really separate one without the other, because you're not going to have, economic development if you, have a really high crime rate in the city. If you don't provide good fire protection, you're not going to attract schools, you're not going to attract businesses. So all of that goes together, and you're not going to attract those with having poor infrastructure either. So they all dovetail together. But public safety is one of my number one priorities.
So over the last year, we've seen certainly some increased division in our community. How would you address that?
It's really sad. You see that all over the country. And as you said in the introduction in the bio, that I served on the board of directors for National League of Cities. That's a group of mayors, city administrators from all over the country. They're Republican, they're Democrat, they're independent, libertarian, Green Party, everybody is represented. And the great part about that organization that I loved was nobody ever wore their R, their D, whatever on their shoulder. Everybody got in, everybody went to work, everybody worked together to get what was best. I can tell you, between the divisions, there's 120 issues. Honestly, there's probably 100 issues that everybody agrees on. Nobody wants potholes. I can tell you that. That's not a Republican, that's not a Democrat. A pothole is a pothole. So there's a lot of things that everybody agrees on, and that's what we chose to lead with, was what we agreed on. There's those 20 things that are your hills to die on, and that's where you work together to try and come up with something that works, that both sides can be happy with, and try to make it work. You're not always going to agree, but you have to agree to respectfully disagree. And that's one of the things that I've seen in I think the past 2 years that's kind of disappointed me and broken my heart for our community is in the divide. It's become so divisive that people won't listen to the other side. People won't validate the other side and say, you know what? You're right. You have a right to your opinion. That opinion doesn't agree with my opinion. It doesn't mean it's necessarily a wrong opinion. It might be wrong, but I think that's what people want to know, and I think that's what people are missing in the last few years, is knowing that somebody is going to listen to them, somebody's going to validate what they have to say, and if they disagree, they're going to explain why they disagree, and sometimes we're going to have to agree to disagree. And that's part of the political world that took me a little while to get used to. People are like, here, I want to donate to your campaign, I want to support you, I want to help you. And you're like, great. Are you looking for a yes person? Because if you are, I'm not that person, because I know you and I know me, and we disagree on several things. And so if you're wanting me to be that person that says, yes, you're going to get that, that's not who I am. And there's times when we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And sometimes those discussions do happen, and they're like, remember I gave to your campaign? Yes, I do. And remember what I said when you gave? It was like, sometimes it's going to be yes, sometimes it's going to be no, and sometimes we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And this is one of those times, and they're like, okay, well, at least I know you heard me, you listened, and you validated what I said, but you disagreed that that's in the best interest of the town, and that's what we have to do. And so I think that's part of that healing process of that divide, is just making sure that everybody's voice is heard and everybody's voice is validated, whether you agree or disagree. You've got to listen to what the other side is. And I remember when I was a planning and zoning commissioner, people would come in and I'd have my mind made up, based on all the facts I had looked at, and they would come in and somebody would say something and they'd present something and I'd be like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. That's a really good point. And I would question them and go farther. And sometimes my vote would change from when I came in thinking how I was going to vote to how I actually voted, because they had made sense, and it made sense for me to change my vote. So I think that's the important part, is just listening and validating and trying to bring the sides together on those 100 things that unite us instead of the 20 things that divide us.
So give us an example of a past crisis that you experienced, and how did you handle that situation?
Ooh, that's a really good question. A past crisis that we handled. Well, I think the biggest crisis from when I started to say governor, when I was mayor, was the 76 project. I came in, that was something that had already been started. The downtown project had already been started. I was concerned about the money that was being spent. Several board members were concerned about the money that was being spent, and some things weren't quite adding up to us. And so we, did a deep dive, and we asked for different things to be changed in the process. And during that process, we found out that one of the staff members had not been truthful with the board and with myself. And so when you come into that situation, you have to make some really tough decisions. And so the decision for us was that person had to go. We had been told that we had received a $12 million loan from MoDOT, and we did not get it. And so that's a big deal when you're out spending money because you've been told you have the money and you don't have it. So it was a long process. It took several times with the board, and it always came down to a 3-3 tie whether we were going to sever the relationship with that employee. And so I asked the attorney to find a case where I could break the tie because it was done in an executive session instead of in general session. And so the mayor doesn't break ties in executive session. And so the attorney found a case that we could back up making that decision. And so I cast the vote to sever that employment with that person. It was hard to do because you had 3 people who wanted to keep the person and 3 people who didn't. And so when it all came down and it ended up from the time we started that process to the time we ended it, when it came time to terminate that employee, we went from a 3-3 tie with me being the tiebreaker to all 6 board members voting to terminate the employee. So that's one of those crisis situations. And then we put a pause on the project because it's like we're bleeding. Our reserves had gone down to, I believe it was about 17-18%. And that was not a comfortable place to be. And when I left in 2019, we had tightened the belt and we had done such a great job that our reserves were back in the high 30%. So that's one of those times when there's a crisis, you got to step up, you got to make that decision. You've got to stand behind your decision, even though it may not be a popular decision, but it's the decision that has to be made for the best of the community. And you do it and you move on and you start building from when you make that decision.
So historically speaking, citizens who gain a position of power sometimes compromise their beliefs or assume a double standard when they are under pressure. How would you personally respond if you found yourself in that scenario?
If I found that I had compromised my values?
That we're in a position to do so. Not that you had,
okay.
But that there was the pressure to do so.
Compromise is never a solution for me. That's just not who I am. I mean, I've got very strict values. My values has always been, faith, family, flag, God, family, business. That's Branson. That's why I get along so well here, and I love living here because our values are very congruent. And so, there is a lot of pressure. And, it's kind of like I said earlier when you're talking about people who donate money to you and money to your campaign, and they expect you to do something. And they might expect you to do something that goes against what you believe. But you have to stay true to who you are, because at the end of the day, I have to stand before God and I want him to say, well done. I don't want him to say, hey, you screwed up when you did this because you knew it was against how you believe and you made that compromise. I think that's a very dangerous place to go, is when you compromise who you are, because then it's not really who you are if you don't hold true to what you believe and what your values are.
What is the distinction between setting policy by city administration and setting policy by city council?
Well, policy is always set by city council.
Mm-hmm.
The city administrator and staff, they have input into what that looks like, and they can bring policy to the board. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it is always the Board of Aldermen that sets the city ordinances. I mean, that's where the buck stops. I only got to play a role in one issue in the 4 years that I was mayor. I went back and I looked at all the voting records recently just to see how many ties I broke. And I only broke a tie on one issue, and that was a seatbelt issue. And then I broke a tie 2 times for appointments of people to be appointed to position. But those were the only times I broke the tie. Mm-hmm. But, staff, they bring things to us to try and help improve the process. Police officers, I don't know what you go through on the road. I'm not a police officer. I don't play one on TV, but I do watch police shows on TV. So, I listen to them when they come and say, here's what we need to make our job to do a better job at our job. Mm-hmm. When the firefighters come to us and say, here's what I need to fight fires and to make the response times lower, I listen to what they say and what they bring forward into the ordinances. And so that's really how things come about. Staff has that input into what type of ordinance that we put together. Sometimes it's staff driven, sometimes it's board driven, sometimes it's mayor driven. I may see something that I said, hey, can we bring this to the board and see how the board feels about this? Or the board does that. but staff does as well. But when it comes down to actually setting policy, policy is only set through the board. It's not set through the mayor. I know we all say, when I get to be mayor, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. What I found is you might do this, this, and this, but if you don't have 3 or 4 people that support you in this, this, and this, it's not going to happen. So it's definitely driven by the board.
So, how do you plan to enable the community to combat the local drug problem?
It's a really good question that I worked really hard on when I was in office. When President Trump was president, under his administration, his drug czar, for lack of a better word, was really Kellyanne Conway. There was a drug czar that had the title, but the person who really had the president's ear in dealing with the opioid epidemic was Kellyanne Conway. And so I had several opportunities to share with her what I felt was the issues that we had in our community. And so she worked very hard with Senator Blunt to try and help us to gain resources that we need. One of the biggest issues that we have in our community when it comes to drugs is we have so many drug rehabilitation centers in town that import people fighting addiction. And I am all for helping people. I want to help everyone in our community that's fighting addiction because it's a horrible, horrible thing. And it's something that's so hard to get over. I've never been there, but I've had friends and family that have been there, and it's a horrible, horrible disease. And so we're importing people, and that's okay. But what the problem is when they fail the program, they're being dumped on our streets. They're not going back to the police departments or the jails that have sent them here. Because what happens is, a judge in St. Louis will say, you have a choice, Josh. You can either go to jail for a year or you can go to Branson, Missouri for a rehabilitation program. What are you going to choose? I'm going to Disneyland. I'm going to Branson, and I'm going to do that. And so according to the facilities that I've talked to, their success rate has been 5 to 15%. That's 85 to 95% of the people that are put back on the street. Let's say they have a great rate of 40%. That's still 60% of the people who are put back on the street with no home, no job, no money. And so that's creating a big problem for crime. A lot of the car break-ins we see are people who have been in a program and are back on the street and are fighting that. And, seriously, what would you do if I was out on the street and I didn't have any way? So one of the things that that Nashville, Tennessee did, which was, I thought, a wonderful program, they did a reunification program. So if you were, out of a program and you found yourself on the street, a group of businesses got together, they created a fund, and they would provide a bus ticket to wherever they wanted to go to be reunified with whatever, family member, friend, whatever that they wanted to do, a beach, whatever. And so they would send them there. So, there's a lot of things that are successful, but I think we have to, first of all, identify and recognize what our problem is. And I think we've done a good job of doing that. And so, how do we help those situations, and how do we help people get to where they need to be that's not on our street?
So, according to a November 12th, 2019 article on KY3, quote, the city is $170 million in debt. What is your plan to move Branson out of that level of debt?
Well, the interesting part that people don't really understand with a lot of that debt is that when we get a fire truck for the city, that fire truck costs $1 million to $2 million. So, are we going to do away with fire trucks? No, we have to have fire trucks. So, police cars. Think about how many police cars we have. People don't realize that police cars cost money, and police cars go in chases. They do different things to where they're damaged and you've got to get a new police car. So when you're looking at just, public safety per se, it costs a lot of money. And so part of the debt is from that. Part of the debt is also from water treatment plants, sewer treatment plants. When you're looking at that infrastructure, you don't just go buy a $20 million piece of equipment or $20 million dollar facility. You have to structure that out over time. Part of that is also the Branson Landing. We've got debt from the Branson Landing. Thank goodness that debt's going to be paid off, I believe, in, I should know the answer to this, and I'm sorry I don't, but like 8 years, I think it is. So when you look at that $170 million debt, it seems like, oh my gosh, what are they wasting money on? But when you look at all of the things that it takes to make up that debt, there's good debt and there's bad debt. Some of that is good debt because I'm sorry, I got to have a fire truck to fight fires. And we have 3 stations, so we have 3 fire trucks. And they don't have a really, really longevity, and it seems like everything always goes out at once. And so, you've got to look at what is the 170 million, and is it good debt or is it bad debt? And I would say that 90 to 95% of that is good debt. Maybe there's 5 to 10% that you can restructure and do something differently. And there were some things that we looked at. We did look at the difference of purchasing vehicles and leasing vehicles, because what we found was our police fleet was getting really old and really tired. We saved a lot of money by leasing the vehicles instead of buying the vehicles. But it's still debt. It's still considered debt. So that's what you got to look at. You're like, what is the 170 million? Do you want to do without fire trucks? Do you want to do without police cars? Do you want to do without water treatment plants or sewer treatment plants? If you do, then hey, we can cut that debt down really quick, really fast, and make it, a lot less. But that's the reality of what that number looks like.
According to the 2019 statistics from Christian Action Ministries, back in 2005, there were 2 motels with extended stay. In 2019, that number had gone to over 40, with over 2,000 Branson residents living in extended stay, 500 of which were children. In 2009, CAM served 11,000 individuals. In 2019, they served 62,000 individuals. And also in 2019, the area poverty rate was listed at 17.8%, but then Executive Director Elizabeth Hughes stated she believed that the rate to be much higher because the census data at that time did not include weekly motels. What is your plan to address these needs within the community?
It's a great question, and it's something, in dealing with the 2020 census that we had issues with, because you're like, how are you going to count all of the people that are living in the extended stay motels, because they're considered sheltered homeless. And so when you look at that high number, that's a big deal. And when I first came into office in 2015, one of the problems I had was those types of facilities were very subpar. I mean, there were lots of issues with fire safety and regular safety. And so that was one of the things we really focused on, and I think we did a great job in improving. Are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. It's going to take a lot of time. It didn't get that way in a day, and it's not going to be fixed in a day as well. But I think, part of the problem is you got to deal with the drug issue, which, we talked about that a little bit earlier. And you've got to deal with the living wages that are in town. When you go for a 9-month economy and you have to try and fend for yourself in January, February, March, those are tough. Those are tough things to do. So, we've got to get the economy back to where, I keep saying that over and over, to where it's a 12-month economy, to where people aren't having to rely on CAM for January, February, and March. We can make it when it's the regular time of the year. And especially when you throw in something like a pandemic, you were already, at a low level before you started. Now you've been without work for, many people for a long time, and you've got businesses that are going under. So, it's a long-term approach. It's not a short-term, rip the Band-Aid off, let's get it done. It's something that's going to take time to do. And I feel that we were really headed in a great direction by making sure, first of all, the places are safe. And as I said, secondly, you got to get that 12-month economy. You've got to keep people working all year long. And you've got to work with some of the businesses to help raise those wages. I met with Brian Stallings from Jesus Was Homeless, and we were talking about we were really working on trying to figure out what is that livable wage, where do we need to get for the community, what kind of housing options do we need to get for the community, and how do we make these happen. And one of the things we did was we went to Washington, D.C., and we fought hard for the opportunity zones. And we got that for, a large portion of the community to get people to come in and build some affordable housing projects. And so we've started in that direction. Got Brian hooked up with a group that was able to help get funding for the tiny home community that he's putting in beside Jesus Was Homeless. So it's really working at the state level and the federal level, and not being afraid to ask and not being afraid to go and fight for what the community needs. And those are some of the things I am most proud of during my tenure as mayor, was having those voices and having those connections in DC to start making some things happen for our community, because we've got to have some affordable housing. It's not just a one-pronged thing. It's drugs, it's economy, getting those jobs, and it's also housing as well.
So talking about housing, this is a little off of the official stuff, but talking about housing, you actually worked with a specific project on this. Tell me about that.
Yes. Right before I left being mayor, Ben Carson, Secretary Carson, was very gracious and great to give us access to $50 million. And that $50 million was given to 5 different zip codes, and they were all rural Southwest Missouri communities. It was us, West Plains, Missouri, I believe maybe Ava. I'm sorry, I can't remember all 5, but I knew we were one of the zip codes. It was done by zip codes. So 65616 was one of the zip codes. And so it was $50 million that was to be used for housing. It was based on some of the flooding things. And, Ben Carson and I, he would know when I was coming. It was funny because all the people in Washington, D.C. that I dealt with, whether it was Kellyanne Conway, whether it was Ben Carson, whoever, they knew I was going to be talking about infrastructure, opioid epidemic. They knew workforce. They knew the 3 things that were really important, that economic development piece. So they knew what I was coming after. So it was $50 million. And so that was right before I left. It was like 2 months before I was voted out of office. From what I've heard recently, that $50 million has gone down to $25 million, and it still hasn't been handed out to communities. And so, that's something that's really important to me. That's one of the reasons why I want to get back in, because I have that passion for fighting for what we need in our community. And if somebody's not being the squeaky wheel, we're not going to get the funds. And to see that $50 million go down to $25 million, I'm like, that's crazy. We've lost access to $25 million. And so, you've got to have somebody that's willing to step up, go toe to toe, fight for what you want. And that's what's important to me. And that's, I think, a lot of times part of the story that people in the community don't understand or don't know, or we don't do a really good job of letting the community know kind of what's happening behind the scenes for us when we're going to DC or when we're going to Jeff City to fight for what we went. When I was mayor, I spent I think it was 8 Wednesdays with the police chief, the fire chief, and the business director, driving to Jeff City and coming back to fight for resources for police and fire. I mean, we had police and fire that would be at a scene, and they would be joined by Taney County Sheriff, Highway Patrol, Western Taney County Fire. They could not communicate between agencies at the scene of the fire or the scene of whatever it was. And so they would have to call to dispatch. Dispatch would have to call over to Taney County and communicate to them. So if you've got your gun drawn and you're in a situation where you've got another entity that's over here with a gun drawn and you're having to call dispatch to communicate to the other person, I'm sorry, that is not the safest way to run a scene. And so we went and we lobbied for 8 weeks to get access to funding. And so part of that funding that we got, that the voters approved, was we were able to put resource officers on every Branson campus. That was huge for our school district. That was wonderful. We loved that. We were able to get the radios before I left to communicate between the agencies. So, I mean, those are life and death kinds of things that you got to go and you've got to fight for, because trust me, everybody else is fighting. And if you're not up there fighting, they're going to get what you should have. And so you've got to have a person in that seat that's going to know, A, who the players are. I don't mind texting them to get what I need. Billy Long is like, oh, here she is again, And so that's part of that mayor part. I said we're not the legislative part, but by golly, we can go and we can fight to try to get funding, because whatever funding we can find somewhere else is going to keep your taxes down, is going to keep my taxes down. And I don't know about you, but I hate paying taxes. That's the last thing. When I have to fill out that check, it's like, ugh, I do not want to do this. I do not want to do this. Nobody likes taxes. So, that's, I'll ask anybody, I'll go anywhere and say, hey, can we get funds for this? We need funds for this. And so that's an important part of the mayor's role that I think a lot of people don't understand that portion. But that really was a hard one for me, because we were just gearing up for that. And that was, front and center for me. And I'm like, I want to get back in so I can get that money and get it back. I want my $50 million back. Come on.
So, and of course, this is related in terms of homelessness and the income and housing situation. But what is your opinion of the homeless camps in the immediate Branson area?
The homeless camps, unfortunately, they're here. You can't turn your back and say they're not here. You can't turn your back and just say, if I don't pay attention, they'll go away, because they're not going to go away. You've got to, once again, I feel like a broken record here. It still goes back with, why are they homeless? Are they fighting addiction? Why are they homeless? Do they not have a job? Do they not have the skills? Do they not have the access? What is that? And as a real estate agent, I know what it takes to be able to get into a home. And for a lot of people, the difference between homelessness is, I can't afford to pay the down payment it takes. We've got people staying in extended stays that are paying $900 to $1,000 a month. You can get in a condo, or you can get in a home for $900 to $1,000 a month. But what you can't do is, you can't afford the down payment of electric, water, sewer, etc. So how do we work as a group together with our nonprofits, etc., to where we can find ways to where we can help people with a hand up, not a hand out? And that's what, if you talk to people who are homeless, they don't want a handout. 90% of them don't want a handout. You go, they're like, yeah, no, I'm good. But if you give them a hand up, they're like, okay, I'll take that. I remember one of the hotels we had to shut down, one of the extended stays. I'll never forget this day. And standing there talking to one of the ladies, and her telling me her story, and it just really resonated with me. And so through social media, we kept in touch. We kept, working together. And now she's got a great paying job. She's doing well. I love it, because she posts on Facebook, I got this new shirt and this new jacket, and every time she does that, it's like this, my heart just, sings. It just makes me feel so good and so proud of her. And she's got her own place to live. She's not in an extended stay anymore. So it's, those kind of stories that is what I want to see. So you can't turn your back on it. You can't say it doesn't exist, which I think a lot of times, officials do. They're like, oh, well, just let it go away. It'll go away. But I think it's systemic, and you got to look at what's causing it. Again, we're back to that. We don't work 12 months. We don't get a salary 12 months. We've got our kids. We've got this. How can we work together to make that a better situation?
So we have programs such as the J-1 visa program, which bring workers into Branson. How do programs like this impact our community?
That's another one that when people would see me coming in DC, they know I was going to be talking about J1s and H2Bs. Because for us in our community, think about it. You've got 10,500 people, according to the 2010 census, that live in Branson. But you have, depending on who you listen to, 7 to 9 million visitors a year. We don't have enough able bodies to fill the jobs, and a lot of people are working 2 and 3 jobs. And so during the peak of the season, June, July, and August, we don't have enough bodies. We can't do it. And if there's ever a time when you saw that, COVID-19 last summer showed you that. I'll never forget, I got a text from Billy Long saying, why aren't these places open? They're only seating 50% of the people. You know, the guidelines are you can have more you can open up more of the restaurant. I'm like, we can't open it up because we don't have enough workers. We don't have our J1s, we don't have our H2Bs, and what happens when you don't have them is this wing of the hotel doesn't open up, this part of the restaurant doesn't open up, this part of the attraction doesn't open up. So it's a very vital part to our community, one that we have used and done well with over the years. And I mean, we last time we had J1s in, which was not last summer because they couldn't come, but the year before, we were close to 1,000. And when you have 1,000 jobs that are unfilled, and trust me, if there were people in Branson that could fill the jobs and apply for the jobs, they would have the jobs because they're unfilled. And so they're a necessary part for our community. And, you know, good thing about it too when they're here is they spend money. They go shopping, they buy things for their families to take back home, they eat in our restaurants, they go to the attractions, they partake in the city. So they're spending their dollars here too.
And of course, now we've already talked a lot about this, but Branson is, of course, that largely seasonal economy. We've talked about addressing that. What are some of really hard goals to move us to a 12-month economy?
I will tell you, I've been working really hard to try and get an Amazon location here, which would be great. I'm very sad that one just went to Republic, one just went to Springfield, but there is one that's still available. That one of the mayors up in the St. Louis area has been working with me since I was mayor to try and get them to bring a small facility. It's not going to be a huge facility, but it's a facility that would fill a role here and bring good paying jobs. I mean, when you look around, Mercy's got great paying jobs. Cox has great paying jobs. Branson Schools has great paying jobs. All of those are 12-month jobs. You know, I feel like I'm a broken record, but it is all about the 12-month job. You've got to have that, and you've got to work toward a living wage. And to be honest, a $2 an hour increase for many of the people in the area would be a living wage. So it's not a lot, but for businesses, it's hard, especially now. To try and increase people's pay $2 an hour, but at some point in time those tough conversations have to be had and have to be really seriously looked at in a way to do that.
So now in April, the continuation of Branson's tourism tax is on the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
What is your opinion of the tourism tax?
Well, I can tell you this: 75% of the tourism tax goes toward infrastructure. 25%, as you know, goes toward marketing. So let's just take the 75%. So the 75% of the tourism tax, I said it before, we've got 10,500 people living here, but we've got 7 to 9 million people coming. So that infrastructure is water, sewer, roads, parks, bridges, all that stuff. So let's say now, all of a sudden the tourism tax goes away. That 75% of that tax has to still go, all that money still has to go for water, sewer, roads, bridges, for the 7 to 9 million people coming here. So now you've got 10,500 people paying 100% of that infrastructure. So if you think your taxes aren't going to go up and my taxes aren't going to go up, somebody's going to have to pay for that piece that's coming out of that tourism tax. So it stinks. You and I just had that conversation a minute ago. I don't want to write the check. You don't want to write the check. I don't want to pay more than people in Hollister pay for not groceries, but for lodging, restaurants, etc. That the tourism tax goes for. So when I go eat, I'm still paying the same thing that everybody over here is. But if everybody over here in the tourism sector isn't paying it, I'm going to have to pay it. And I don't want to have to pay 100% of it. I would rather them take their portion and pay than me have to consume 100%. So, do I want it? No. Does anybody want more taxes? No. But if it's going to be divided between me and someone else, or me have to pay the whole thing, that's one thing I'd rather share with everyone else. Let's let you help pay this portion. So, do I like it? No. Do I think we have to have it? Yes. If it doesn't pass, will our taxes go up as citizens living here? Probably so. Probably so. So it's a lesser of the two evils when you come to that.
What is your understanding of the perception of Branson worldwide, and should that perception be changed in any way?
Ooh, that's a really good question. And one that, I remember years ago when I was an elementary principal, there were two principals in the country that were selected to go sit on the Oxford University Roundtable in Oxford, England. And I was one of the two. Why, I don't know, but here you go. I was there. And I'll never forget when I got to the university, there was a student, a young man, who greeted me and, escorted me to the dorm where, they were putting us up. And he's like, hey, where are you from? And I was like, I'm from Branson, Missouri. And he's like, oh, I always want to go to Branson. I want to take my family there. They have lots of shows there. They have lots of entertainment. And I'm like, yes, they do. How do you know Branson? Oh, my family all loves that. We've all dreamed of going there. And so, here I am halfway across the world in England where, you'd think nobody knows about Branson. And we recently had a show come here that, it was Raiding the Rock Vault. And so I was taking a lot of the cast from Raiding the Rock Vault to the airport. And so one of the guys in the show is from the band Bon Jovi. And so, you always kind of want to know what people think. And so I asked him, I said, what did you think when you were told you were going to come to Branson to play? And he's like, I was like, don't make me go, don't make me go, don't make me go. And I was like, oh, that's never something you really want to hear. And I was like, why? And he's like, oh, I just heard that, it's just this and it's that. And I'm like, okay, well, now you've been here for, 3 weeks. Now what do you think? He's like, oh, I'm saying the same thing. Don't let me go, don't make me go, don't make me go. But I mean, don't make me leave here because I want to live here and I want my family to live here. And I was like, wow, that's really changed. And so I said, you have an opportunity now because Branson, people either love Branson or they hate Branson. It doesn't seem like there's a real middle. People love it. It's a place to go. It's to have fun. They've got shows. They've got all this stuff. And so I said, you have an opportunity being with Bon Jovi. You see a boatload of people. And so I would just ask you, when you have an opportunity to share our story, share it so that you can help those people that have that negative view of Branson to have a positive view. If we can get out and tell our story, I always feel like if I can get people here once, they'll come back again. I just got to get them here the first time. And so I think we do a good job in telling our story. I don't know that we do a great job always of telling our story. I think people have some preconceived idea. And the thing I love about Branson is that there is something for everybody. My mama, she is the theater show person. If I'm like, I'm going to go see a show, she's, can I go, can I go, can I go, can I go, can I go? I mean, she wants to see Mom. I mean, we're like show. My dad, not the show guy. He's just, unless it's bluegrass, he's like, or gospel, he doesn't want to go. But he loves to golf and he loves to fish. So I can go to the shows with my mom. I can go golf or fish with my dad. I mean, there's something for everybody and they don't always like to. And so I think sometimes people get tunnel vision on one thing or the other. They get tunnel vision on theaters. They get tunnel visions on golf. They get tunnel vision on this. Whereas I think we need to just share, because there's something for everybody. I'm like, you're going to find something to do here that you love. And I'm telling you, we've got some of the best live theater shows than Broadway. I'm like, you look at some of the Arts Council things that they're doing, phenomenal. I mean, I'm blown away. Every time I go, I'm like, wow, that was really good. And that was one of the things I loved the summer I spent in New York, was going to Broadway shows. I'm sorry, we've got better talent than Broadway has. So, we need to do a better job of telling that story, because people will want to see the shows if they know what they are and how great they are. And so I think that's part of our deal, is we've got to tell the story.
Yeah. And this is really a follow-up question to that. But what is the cultural identity of Branson?
Cultural identity of Branson is values. We've talked about that before. Faith, family, and the flag. That's number one. We honor our veterans. We honor God. And you see that in everything around town. And the other thing is, what made us who we are is several things. Number one is live entertainment, our shows. I remember we moved to Springfield when I was 7 years old. And let me tell you, when I went to the Ballnubber show and I went to the Presley show, I sat there as a kid and I was just like, oh my gosh, look at that. Oh, it's George Agernitzer. I see him on TV. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. I mean, I can still, as a kid, remember that feeling of going to that show. And that feeling still, as I'm going to be 62 this year. That feeling still is like, oh my gosh, look, there's so-and-so, they're on stage. Oh, I see them at the, it's like so cool. So you've got the values, you've got the theaters, and oh my gosh, where do you find the beauty that you have here? We have the pristine lakes, we have the hills, the mountains. I remember as, once again, a kid coming from Springfield on that 2-lane road that would take us 3 hours to get from Springfield to Branson. And you would sit there and you'd just be like looking, going, wow, look at those rocks and look at that. Now as a real estate agent, I go, oh wow, look at those rocks. I've got to get that sign in that rock. It takes a sledgehammer. But, I mean, those are really the things that, I think that's our cultural identity is, we were based on our values of faith, family, flag, friends, fun. It's all the great words. And I think that's who we are, and I think that's who we were when we began. And I don't think we've deviated from it too much. Now, I will tell you, there are some things that are trying to change. I never thought in my lifetime that we would have male stripper shows come to Branson. And do your homework, because one of the candidates brought the show to town, and if that's the type of future you want for Branson, I'm not your person. Don't vote for me, because that's just not my cup of tea from where we are and where I think we need to be. So that's our cultural identity, is those values and the beauty of everything that we have and where we were when we started. What made us? Who are we? The one thing I miss is I truly miss all the crafters. My senior year in high school, I had a season pass. I mean, I've had a season pass since I was little, since they started them at Silver Dollar City. But my senior year, every Saturday, I would go to pick a friend, and we'd go to Silver Dollar City, and we'd sit outside the general store. They had this pickle barrel that had checkers on it. And we would play checkers, and we would talk to everybody going by, hey, where are you from? What do you do? I mean, some things never change. Still, all these years later, I still do the same, hey, where are you from? But the crafters, that was like so much fun. And that's a sad part of our culture, not just here, but I think around the world is, we've lost some of those things. I remember watching Shad as he was, doing the blacksmith and all of that. And so those are the things I miss, but we still have, those core values of what made us who we are.
And how would you define the Ozarks culture as a whole?
The Ozarks culture as a whole, I think it's still the same. I think it's still all the values of, what we hold dear. I think America, those values and that culture is being, challenged. And like I said, I never thought I would see things coming to Branson that I've seen. But that's not who I am, and that's not what's important to me. When I make decisions, I try to say, this is Is this based on the values? You asked that question earlier. What would you do? Would you change those values? No. No, those values have been since the beginning of time in this area, in Branson, in the Ozark Mountain Country as a whole. And I think, I think the cultural is the same for Branson and Ozark Mountain Country. I think they're congruent.
And what's the best way that we can work to retain that culture?
Acknowledging it, first of all, embracing it, and protecting it. I think that's the key. Like I said, if you want a candidate who's going to import folks fighting addiction, put them on the streets, I'm not your candidate. I'm not that person. If you want that person that, for me, the values are a little bit different, with, like I said, the Mill Stripper Show, I'm not your candidate. But if you want somebody who, my values have always been God, family, and then business. I mean, that's just how I was taught growing up. I haven't deviated from that. If that's something that you want, then I would consider voting for me. I mean, that's who I am. My personal mission statement is hope, helping other people excel. That's what I want to do. I'm a connector. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a connector. If you want something done, you call me. I can't do it, but I'm going to connect you to somebody who can. I just had somebody Friday call me and say, I applied for the PPP and I haven't got it, and I don't know why, because everybody around me has gotten it that applied the same day. Let me connect you to Senator Blunt's office, because they will be able to get you the answer that you need for your business and your employees. So I've done that since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I'm like, oh, I can get you to so-and-so, or I can get you to so-and-so. I love that. That's my bailiwick. That's what I thrive at.
And what policies will you implement in the first year of your term, and what are the direct benefits to Branson residents from those policies?
As we said before, I don't set policy. Unfortunately, that's not how it goes. It's policy is set by the board. What I can do, however, is I can guide them, share with them, bring topics up, and those topics I've said that are important to me before: public safety, infrastructure, economic development, which includes workforce development. So those are the three things that I'm going to focus on, making sure that we get what we need to make those three things successful, because if those three things are successful, that impacts you directly as a citizen. We don't want to pay taxes. We don't want to pay high taxes, but we have to do some necessary things. And so working on that, and as I said, if you see something that's not right, making it right. That hard decision that I had to make, that crisis that we talked about early, that's the kind of things you want somebody in there that's going to do that. And in the first year, it's just continuing where I left off. It's fighting for those affordable housing dollars. It's fighting for all those resources that are out there that we can get, that we can have. Those are the things that are important to me. Doing things that make your life easier, my life easier, and everybody in our community's life easier, and makes it the best place to live, work, and play.
Karen, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Good luck on everything.
Thank you. I always love having conversations with you, because you always make me think of things that sometimes I forget to think about.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.